Giuseppe Mazzini was an Italian politician, journalist and activist for the unification of Italy. His efforts helped bring about the independent and unified Italy in place of the several separate states, many dominated by foreign powers, that existed until the 19th century. He also helped define the modern European movement for popular democracy in a republican state. Mazzini's thought had a very considerable influence on the Italian and European republican movements, on the Constitution of Italy, about Europeanism, and, more nuanced, on many politicians of a later period. Among them, men like U.S. President Thomas Woodrow Wilson and Britain Prime Minister David Lloyd George, but also post-colonial leaders such as Gandhi, Golda Meir, David Ben-Gurion, Jawaharlal Nehru and Sun Yat-sen. Biography. Early years. Mazzini was born in Genoa, then part of the Ligurian Republic, under the rule of the French Empire. His father, Giacomo Mazzini, originally from Chiavari, was a university professor who had adhered to Jacobin ideology. His mother, Maria Drago, was renowned for her beauty and religious fervor. From a very early age, Mazzini showed good learning qualities. He was admitted to the university at only 14, graduating in law in 1826, and initially practiced as a poor man's lawyer. He also hoped to become a historical novelist or a dramatist, and in the same year he wrote his first essay, De l'amor patrio di Dante, which was published in 1837. In 1828–29 he collaborated with the Genoese newspaper, L'Indicator Genovese, which was however soon closed by the Piedmontese authorities. He then became one of the leading authors of L'Indicator Livornese, published at Livorno by F. D. Guerazzi, until this paper was closed down by the authorities, too. In 1827 Mazzini travelled to Tuscany, where he became a member of the Carbonari, a secret association with political purposes. On the 31st of October of that year he was arrested at Genoa and interned at Savona. In early 1831, he was released from prison, but confined to a small hamlet. He chose exile instead, moving to Geneva in Switzerland. Failed insurrections. In 1831 Mazzini went to Marseille, where he became a popular figure among the Italian exiles. He was a frequent visitor to the apartment of Giuditta Belleria Seidlide, a beautiful Modenese widow who became his lover. In August 1832 Giuditta Seidlide gave birth to a boy, almost certainly Mazzini's son, whom she named Joseph Demosthene Adolphe Aristide after members of the family of Demosthene Olivia, with whom Mazzini was staying. The Olivias took care of the child in June 1833 when Giuditta and Mazzini left for Switzerland. The child died in February 1835. Mazzini organized a new political society called La Giovane Italia. Young Italy was a secret society formed to promote Italian unification. Mazzini believed that a popular uprising would create a unified Italy, and would touch off a European-wide revolutionary movement. The group's motto was God and the People, and its basic principle was the unification of the several states and kingdoms of the peninsula into a single republic as the only true foundation of Italian liberty. The new nation had to be 1. Independent, free republic. Mazzini's political activism met some success in Tuscany, Abruzzi, Sicily, Piedmont, and his native Liguria, especially among several military officers. Young Italy counted about 60,000 adherents in 1833, with branches in Genoa and other cities. In that year Mazzini first attempted insurrection, which would spread from Chambéry, Alessandria, Turin, and Genoa. However, the Savoy government discovered the plot before it could begin and many revolutionaries were arrested. The repression was ruthless. Mazzini was tried in absence and sentenced to death. Despite this setback, he organized another uprising for the following year. A group of Italian exiles were to enter Piedmont from Switzerland and spread the revolution there, while Giuseppe Garibaldi, who had recently joined Young Italy, was to do the same from Genoa. However, the Piedmontese troops easily crushed the new attempt. In the spring of 1834, while at Bern, Mazzini and a dozen refugees from Italy, Poland, and Germany founded a new association with the grandiose name of Young Europe. Its basic, and equally grandiose idea, was that, as the French Revolution of 1789 had enlarged the concept of individual liberty, another revolution would now be needed for national liberty, and his vision went further because he hoped that in the no doubt distant future free nations might combine to form a loosely federal Europe with some kind of federal assembly to regulate their common interests. His intention was nothing less than to overturn the European settlement agreed in 1815 by the Congress of Vienna, which had re-established an oppressive hegemony of a few great powers and blocked the emergence of smaller nations. Mazzini hoped, but without much confidence, that his vision of a league or society of independent nations would be realized in his own lifetime. In practice, Young Europe lacked the money and popular support for more than a short-term existence. Nevertheless, he always remained faithful to the ideal of a united continent for which the creation of individual nations would be an indispensable preliminary. On 28 May 1834, Mazzini was arrested at Solothurn, and exiled from Switzerland. He moved to Paris, where he was again imprisoned on 5 July. He was released only after promising he would move to England. Mazzini, together with a few Italian friends, moved in January 1837 to live in London in very poor economic conditions. Exile in London. On 30 April 1840, Mazzini reformed the Giovanni Italia in London, and on 10 November of the same year he began issuing the Apostolato Popolare, a succession of failed attempts at promoting further uprisings in Sicily, Abruzzi, Tuscany, and Lombardy. Venetia discouraged Mazzini for a long period, which dragged on until 1840. He was also abandoned by Sidoli, who had returned to Italy to rejoin her children. The help of his mother pushed Mazzini to create several organizations aimed at the unification or liberation of other nations. In the wake of Giovanni Italia, Young Germany, Young Poland, and Young Switzerland, which were under the aegis of Young Europe, he also created an Italian school for poor people active from 10 November 1841 at 5 Greville Street, London. From London he also wrote an endless series of letters to his agents in Europe and South America, and made friends with Thomas Carlyle and his wife Jane. The Young Europe movement also inspired a group of young Turkish army cadets and students who, later in history, named themselves the Young Turks. In 1843 he organized another riot in Bologna, which attracted the attention of two young officers of the Austrian Navy, Attilio and Emilio Bandera. With Mazzini's support, they landed near Cosenza, but were arrested and executed. Mazzini accused the British government of having passed information about the expeditions to the Neapolitans, and question was raised in the British Parliament, when it was admitted that his private letters had indeed been opened, and its contents revealed by the Foreign Office to the Austrian and Neapolitan governments. Mazzini gained popularity and support among the British liberals, who were outraged by such a blatant intrusion of the government into his private correspondence. In 1847 he moved again to London, where he wrote a long, open letter to Pope Pius IX, whose apparently liberal reforms had gained him a momentary status as possible paladin of the unification of Italy. The Pope, however, did not reply. He also founded the People's International League. By March 8, 1848, Mazzini was in Paris, where he launched a new political association, the Associazione Nazionale Italiana. The 1848–49 revolts. On April 7, 1848, Mazzini reached Milan, whose population had rebelled against the Austrian garrison and established a provisional government. The First Italian War of Independence, started by the Piedmontese King Charles Albert to exploit the favorable circumstances in Milan, turned into a total failure. Mazzini, who had never been popular in the city because he wanted Lombardy to become a republic instead of joining Piedmont, abandoned Milan. He joined Garibaldi's irregular force at Bergamo, moving to Switzerland with him. On February 9, 1849, a republic was declared in Rome, with Pius IX already having been forced to flee to Gaeta the preceding November. On the same day the republic was declared, Mazzini reached the city. He was appointed, together with Carlo Armellini and Aurelio Saffi, as a member of the triumvirate of the new republic on March 29, becoming soon the true leader of the government and showing good administrative capabilities in social reforms. However, when the French troops called by the Pope made clear that the resistance of the Republican troops, led by Garibaldi, was in vain, on July 12, 1849, Mazzini set out for Marseille, from where he moved again to Switzerland. Late activities. Mazzini spent all of 1850 hiding from the Swiss police. In July he founded the Association Amici d'Italia in London, to attract consensus towards the Italian liberation cause. Two failed riots in Mantua and Milan were a crippling blow for the Mazzinian organization, whose prestige never recovered. He later opposed the alliance signed by Savoy with Austria for the Crimean War. Also in vain was the expedition of Felice Orsini in Carrara of 1853–54. In 1856 he returned to Genoa to organize a series of uprisings. The only serious attempt was that of Carlo Pisacane in Calabria, which again met a dismaying end. Mazzini managed to escape the police, but was condemned to death by default. From this moment on, Mazzini was more of a spectator than a protagonist of the Italian Risorgimento, whose reins were now strongly in the hands of the Savoyard monarch Victor Emmanuel II and his skilled prime minister, Camillo Benso, Conte di Cavour. The latter defined him as chief of the assassins. In 1858 he founded another journal in London, Pensiero e Azione. Also there, on February 21, 1859, together with 151 Republicans he signed a manifesto against the alliance between Piedmont and the Emperor of France, which resulted in the Second War of Italian Independence and the conquest of Lombardy. On the 2nd of May 1860 he tried to reach Garibaldi, who was going to launch his famous expedition of the Thousand in southern Italy. In the same year he released Uvra dell'Uomo, a synthesis of his moral, political and social thoughts. In mid-September he was in Naples, then under Garibaldi's dictatorship, but was invited by the local vice-dictator Giorgio Pallavicino to move away. The new Kingdom of Italy was created in 1861 under the Savoy monarchy. In 1862, Mazzini joined Garibaldi in his failed attempt to free Rome. In 1866, Italy joined the Austro-Prussian War and gained Venetia. At this time Mazzini frequently spoke out against how the unification of his country was being achieved, and in 1867 he refused a seat in the Italian Chamber of Deputies. In 1870, he tried to start a rebellion in Sicily, and was arrested and imprisoned in Gaeta. He was freed in October, in the amnesty declared after the kingdom finally took Rome, and returned to London in mid-December. Giuseppe Mazzini died of pleurisy in Pisa in 1872. His body was embalmed by Paolo Guarini. His funeral was held in Genoa, with 100,000 people taking part in it. Ideology. Mazzini, an Italian nationalist, was a fervent advocate of republicanism and envisioned a united, free and independent Italy. Unlike his contemporary Garibaldi, who was also a Republican, Mazzini never compromised his Republican ideals and refused to swear an oath of allegiance to the House of Savoy. Mazzini was vigorously opposed to Marxism and communism, and in 1871 he condemned the socialist revolt in France that led to the creation of the short-lived Paris Commune. This later caused Karl Marx to refer to Mazzini as a reactionary and an old ass. Mazzini rejected the Marxist doctrines of class struggle in materialism, and stressed the need for class collaboration, making him an enemy of both communism and capitalism. Mazzini also rejected the classical liberal principles of the Enlightenment based on the doctrine of individualism, which he criticized as presupposing either metaphysical materialism or political atheism. Influenced by his Jansenist upbringing, Mazzini's thought is characterized by a strong religious fervor and deep sense of spirituality. Mazzini described himself as a Christian and emphasized the necessity of faith and a relationship with God, while vehemently denouncing rationalism and atheism. His motto was Dio e Popolo. He regarded patriotism as a duty, and love for the fatherland as a divine mission, saying that the fatherland was the home wherein God has placed us, among brothers and sisters linked to us by the family ties of a common religion, history, and language. In his 1835 publication Fede e Avvenire, he wrote, "We must rise again as a religious party. The religious element is universal and immortal. The initiators of a new world, we are bound to lay the foundations of a moral unity, a humanitarian Catholicism." However, Mazzini's relationship with the Catholic Church and the papacy was not always a kind one. While he initially supported Pope Pius IX upon his election, writing an open letter to him in 1847, he later published a scathing attack against the Pope in his Sull'Encyclica di Papa Pioix in 1849. Although some of his religious views were at odds with the Catholic Church and the papacy, and his writings often were tinged with anti-clericalism, at the same time Mazzini criticized Protestantism, stating that it is divided and subdivided into 1,000 sects, all founded on the rights of individual conscience, all eager to make war on one another, and perpetuating that anarchy of beliefs which is the sole true cause of the social and political disturbances that torment the peoples of Europe. Mazzini formulated a concept known as thought and action, in which thought and action must be joined together, and every thought must be followed by action, therefore rejecting intellectualism and the notion of divorcing theory from practice. He likewise rejected the concept of the rights of man, which had developed during the Age of Enlightenment, arguing instead that individual rights were a duty to be won through hard work, sacrifice and virtue, rather than rights, which were intrinsically owed to man. He outlined his thought in his Dovere dell'Uomo, published in 1860. Mazzini was also an early advocate of a United States of Europe, about a century before the European Union began to take shape. For him, European unification was a logical continuation of Italian unification. Criticisms. Karl Marx, in an interview by R. Landa from 1871, said that Mazzini's ideas represented nothing better than the old idea of a middle-class republic. Marx believed, especially after the revolutions of 1848, that Mazzini's point of view had become reactionary, and the proletariat had nothing to do with it. In another interview, Marx described Mazzini as that everlasting old ass. Mazzini, in turn, described Marx as a destructive spirit whose heart was filled with hatred rather than love of mankind, and declared that, despite the communist egalitarianism which Marx preaches, he is the absolute ruler of his party. Admittedly, he does everything himself, but he is also the only one to give orders, and he tolerates no opposition. Legacy. Mazzini's socio-political thought has been referred to as Mazzinianism, and his worldview as the Mazzinian conception. terms which were later utilized by Benito Mussolini and fascists such as Giovanni Gentile to describe their political ideology and spiritual conception of life. Metternich described Mazzini as the most influential revolutionary in Europe. Indian independence leader Vinayak Damodar Savarkar was influenced by Giuseppe Garibaldi and Giuseppe Mazzini. Carl Schurz, in Volume 1 of his Reminiscences, gives a biographical sketch of Mazzini and recalls two meetings he had with him when they were both in London in 1851. While the book 10,000 Famous Freemasons by William R. Denslow lists Mazzini as a Mason, and even a past Grand Master of the Grand Orient of Italy. Articles on the Grand Orient of Italy's own website question whether he was ever a Mason, and do not list him as a past Grand Master. Often viewed in the Italy of the time as a godlike figure, Mazzini was nonetheless denounced by many of his compatriots as a traitor. Contemporary historians tended to believe that he ceased to contribute anything productive or useful after 1849, but modern ones take a more favorable opinion of him. In London, Mazzini resided at 155 North Gower Street, near Euston Square, which is now marked with a commemorative English heritage blue plaque. A bust of Mazzini is in New York's Central Park, between 67th and 68th Streets, just west of the West Drive. The 1973-1974 academic year at the College of Europe was named in his honor. Works: Warfare Against the Man, On Nationality, The Duties of Man and Other Essays. J.M. Dent & Sons, London, 1907. ISBN 1596052198. A Cosmopolitanism of Nations. Giuseppe Mazzini's Writings on Democracy, Nation-Building, and International Relations. Recchia, Stefano, and Urbinati, Nadia, editors. Princeton University Press, 2009. Articles: Is It Revolt or a Revolution? In Tate's Edinburgh Magazine, June 1840, pp. 385 to 390.